The complex relationship between King Saul and David is narrated in 1 Samuel chapter 24 verse 1 to 22 and 26 verses 5 to 20. They were both chosen and anointed by God through the ministry of the revered judge and prophet Samuel. Saul was Israel's first king, whereas David was to be the future king of Israel. David was anointed while Saul was still king. Saul was troubled by an evil spirit and sought someone to play music to soothe him. David, known for his skill on the lyre, was brought to Saul's court. Saul offered Michal to David as a wife after David defeated Goliath, effectively rewarding him for his bravery and military success. After David eliminated Goliath, the Philistine giant, Saul appointed him as army commander. As David's popularity grew, particularly after victories in battle, Saul became increasingly jealous and fearful of David as a rival and attempted to eliminate him multiple times. Michal placed an idol in David's bed, covering it with a blanket to make it appear as though he was still sleeping. She cleverly deceives her father's soldiers by lowering David out of a window, allowing him to flee and live as a fugitive. During this time, Saul gave Michal to another man, Palti, as a wife. David had two opportunities to remove King Saul from the earth permanently, but in both times he refused to do so, or allow his men to do it because he respected Saul's position as king and his commitment to God's will. David explained to his men that he would not harm Saul because Saul was the Lord's anointed, emphasizing that he would not take matters into his own hands to establish his own rise to power. Saul went into a cave unaware that David and his men were hiding inside that very cave at the back. David quietly cut off a corner of Saul's robe to demonstrate that he had the chance to eliminate the king. He delayed confronting Saul until the king and his bodyguards were far away. David then waved a piece of the king's robe to indicate that he could have eliminated Saul except for his own conviction. Saul and his men camped in the wilderness, and David, along with Abishai, sneaked into their camp at night. David took Saul's spear and water jug to show him that he had been spared again. Once David has retreated from Saul's army and was at a safe distance, he taunted Saul's general, Abner, for the serious security breach of the king. Saul recognized David's voice and calls out to him as, "My son." Upon realizing David had spared him again, he acknowledged David's righteousness and even wept, expressing regret over his pursuit of David. This encounter deepened the complex relationship between the two, with Saul recognizing David's integrity while still being troubled by his own jealousy and fear of losing the throne. He recognized that David would one day be king and asked him to swear not to cut off his descendants. Faced with imminent defeat and the passing of his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul was overwhelmed by despair. In an attempt to avoid capture and humiliation by the enemy, he chose to fall by his own sword on Mount Gilboa. His passing marked a profound shift in Israel's leadership, an end to the monarchy that began with such promise. David, upon learning of Saul's passing, instead of rejoicing at the demise of a rival, he mourned. David tore his clothes and wept for Saul and Jonathan, his beloved friend. David's honor for Saul, despite the immense suffering he had caused, reflects a profound respect for the office of kingship. This act of mourning illustrates David's character, not one twisted by hatred or revenge but grounded in a sense of honor and loyalty. David was soon anointed as king over Judah, and Ishbosheth, the surviving son of Saul, was made king of northern Israel. Later, after Ishbosheth's death, David ruled over all of Israel. His rise to kingship was the fulfillment of God's promise. One of the most beautiful aspects of David's legacy is how he treated the descendants of Saul. He sought out Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, who was disabled, to show him kindness for Jonathan's sake. Despite the societal expectations that typically come with regal power, quieting any potential threat from past enemies, David instead extended grace, allowing Mephibosheth to eat at his table as one of his own sons. David chose to uphold the principles of loyalty and love that he had shared with Jonathan, demonstrating that our legacies are not defined by our conflicts but by our choices. Years later, David sought to reclaim Michal as his wife. He sent for her to be brought to him, which created a political statement about his claim to the throne and his connection to Saul's lineage. As we reflect on this intricate relationship between Saul and David, we are invited to consider the dynamics of our relationships. Jealousy and strife can easily disrupt our connections with others, but we are called to respond with humility, respect, and love, just as David did. In a world where anger and resentment often dominate, let us ensure that we are known for our grace and kindness, not just to our friends. As David's relationship with Saul reminds us, there is always room for reconciliation, compassion, and loyalty. Thanks for passing by. Please click the like and subscribe buttons.